First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And secondly, I think, switch the atmosphere a little bit because I will be talking about a less serious topic. But it's very interesting. Though less serious, it is very important in terms of defining identity and belonging in many respects, especially cinema as an art of 20th century. Not 21st century. 21st century, my recent research is on Turkish television series, which are not melodramas, which are not telenovelas only, which are not soap operas only, which are also very hardcore historical political action adventures at the same time. It's very interesting in that regard. I mean, actually, you want to understand 21st century Turkey, kind of going over all those television series will also give you very interesting ideas. And on top of that, I'm also working on a little bit on early cinema, how cinema arrived in Turkey, because it's very interesting. When you think of cinema, it's a product of a particular Western history, which has nothing to do with the visual history of the Ottoman Empire, because it goes back to Renaissance perspective, then the invention of camera obscura, then all that linear painting, and afterwards, linear perspectival painting, sorry, and then afterwards the invention of photographic camera, and eventually adding movement to photography. And it has its own particular Western history, which kind of is a very different way of seeing than the way of seeing in the Ottoman times, based on miniature paintings, for instance, because miniature paintings are more narrative realism based paintings. The narrative is more important than what you show in them, unlike Western paintings, which, I mean, what you show is predominantly important. Narrative is only secondary to that. So, and narratives are good. We love stories, and I will start with the story, story of the film. Have you heard of a neighborhood called Taşkasap? No. Taşkasap in Istanbul. It is destroyed to open up a street, and the name of the street is Millet Caddesi, the nation street. So to open up a space for the nation, Taşkasap was destroyed. And how can we get to Taşkasap? Where is it? Etc. If you have those questions, there's a very nice route that takes you to Taşkasap, because if you kind of get on the tram from Kabataş and start your voyage, where is Kabataş? Right below Pera. Pera means across in Greek, across of the other side of the old Istanbul. Or it's Galata. Galata means the slope in Italian, the Italian name. Or Karaköy, the Karaim Jewish village. And you cross the Galata Bridge, make a left on the tram, and the tram goes towards Sirkeci through the street of Reşadiye, Sultan Reşad's. If you follow that seaside route over there, it will take you to the street, which I'm not gonna go at the moment. This is a very interesting metonomical journey, Istanbul. You are making a right in front of the Sirkecigar, and the street is called Ankara Caddesi. And the tram starts going up the hill, makes a left. The first street is called Ebu Suud, Şeyhülislam Ebu Suud Efendi of 16th century Ottoman Empire. Then after Ebu Suud, it turns into Alemdar Paşa Street, Alemdar Street. Then you go further to the palace. It's called Divan Yolu. You came to the court and the palace. But it becomes very interesting afterwards. After Divan Yolu, around the Sultanahmet Square, it turns into Yeniçeriler Caddesi, Janissary Street. Then Janissary Street, the same street. I'm talking about the same street. It changes names. This is the operation. It's very interesting. Yeniçeri Street turns into Ordu Caddesi. And after Laleli, it turns into Millet Caddesi, the Nation Street. And Taşkasap was a neighborhood over there. And in Taşkasap, there was a lady who was living. And she had many husbands. And she separated each husband to a different day. But Taşkasap was a lower middle class, later destroyed in the 1950s, Muslim neighborhood. And this lady was lower middle class, and she had different husbands. One was a barber, the other was a night watch, etc. Those kind of professions. So Saturday one was coming, Sunday another one is coming, Monday another one, etc. Those were the first five. The sixth one was a troubled guy, a little bit kind of mafioso type. But still, all those six were lower class husbands. So she wants the seventh one. For that, she went out of the neighborhood. Because the seventh one, with whom she fell in love. So Friday, I am in love, her story. The Friday guy was a doctor from another neighborhood. So, doctor, science, I mean, whatever. You are getting out of old Istanbul to a different neighborhood. All those kind of metaphorical invitations are over there. But I'm not going to go into that route. Instead, this lady's name is Hürmüz. Yedi Kocalı Hürmüz. That's the story. And Yedi Kocalı Hürmüz's story is written by Sadık Şendil. There are three, I mean, like in Turkey, we have a name for the popular film industry, Yeşilçam. It means green pine. It's based on a street in Beyoğlu because in the late 40s, the majority of the film production companies were gathered around that street. It's not much like Hollywood in terms of, it's very interesting. Hollywood, there is wood in it. In UK, we have Pinewood Studios, there is pine in it. And in Turkey, we have Yeşilçam as a combination. Yet another kind of woody, metaphorical thing going on over there. But Yeşilçam was a particular period from late 40s to early 1990s. So it's kind of a little bit after the early Republican era. And since yesterday, I mean, like we are listening to talks which are talking about Turkification, which is a top-to-down type of perspective. But what Yeşilçam managed to do is kind of a grassroots Turkey, from bottom to up, which I call as Turkification from below, not from above. So, but how did it happen? How did that happen? And how do we have that history? Sadık Şendil is a critical name because we have four script writers. And during the Yeşilçam era, there are around 7,000 films, feature-length films made. And those four script writers wrote around 2,000. So they are crazy figures. And Sadık Şendil, I mean, like, he was very well aware of theater in the round, Karagöz, all those earlier kind of entertainment practices, which fell outside the reach of the Western style of filmmaking. Because in the Western understanding of film, there's a clear-cut separation between reality and fiction. Fiction is the area of the film. But in Yeşilçam cinema, fiction doesn't work like that. Because a villain in a movie, next day when he's walking on the street, could be beaten up because of the things he did in the movie. Or, for instance, for Kurtlar Vadisi Valley of the Wolves series, one of the characters passed away in the series, and we had a few funeral ceremonies for the guy. So I mean, like, the lines between reality and fiction are kind of punctured in different ways. And all these has its own history that you can dig up in miniature paintings, Karagöz shadow play, or theater in the round. So that history is very interesting, and I will kind of, in that regard, shift how we can understand the early Republican era from a more textual approach so far that we had seen to a more kind of visual approach. Because it's interesting, I mean, like when you are talking about architecture, for instance, or city planning, it's very visual. Or when you are talking about switching from alphabet to alphabet, It's very visual. You start changing, switching your vision from right to left to right, or wheeling. Once again, very visual. So, I mean, like, how can we think about perhaps the phenomenology of the early Republican era? What were the five senses? What was the scent of the early Republic? How can we touch it? Or how can we visualize it? I mean, those might be the alternative questions that one might ask, because I mean, like, when you start asking those questions, then you're also asking a particular and very important, significant question. Whose revolution was that? Who was touching it? Who was smelling it? Who was tasting it? Yeşilçam later on, starting from the 40s, gave the chance of hearing and seeing it in different ways and with different narratives. So in that regard, it's interesting. But in the early Republican era, unfortunately, cinema was not utilized as much as you would have expected. There are reasons for that, which I will delve shortly. You can find many different reasons to a disdain toward cinema. But there are also some very simple, basic physical and economic reasons, because it was an expensive art at the time. So you can also think about those things. But before going there, I mean, like, I will go back to Sadık Şendil and Taşkasap. There was another person. I mean, Taşkasap, that neighborhood is no more there. But there was another person from Taşkasap, and his name was Saadettin Kaynak. He's a very famous kind of classical music composer. That part we know. But he was very instrumental in another. In 1932, with the order of Atatürk, he was the Imam of Süleymaniye Mosque. And with his order, he went there. For the first time, he didn't have a headgear. He was wearing a suit for the Friday prayer, which he conducted as the Imam. And he gave the Friday sermon in Turkish. And that was kind of a big thing that you can imagine, I mean, in the eyes of the old Istanbulites. Because, like, I mean, Taşkasap was in Fatih. You have Saadettin Kaynak from Fatih, and he was doing that kind of a thing. But Saadettin Kaynak and Münir Nurettin Selçuk are also important for another reason. Until from the start of the Republic till 1938, the number of films that were made are around 10 to 15, and all of them were handled by Muhsin Ertuğrul. He was predominantly a theater person, and he didn't like filmmaking, but very interestingly, he made 3 movies in Germany between 1919 and 1921, and he worked with Karl May, the popular German historical novelist. He was extremely popular at the time. And then, interestingly enough, he also, in 1924, went to the Soviet Union and made a movie over there. 2 movies, actually. One is Spartacus, the other one is Found. It's available right now. So technically, he knows filmmaking, but we should also think about another thing. In the 1920s, films were silent. Sound didn't arrive. So silent films were more international, because there was no voice in them, no logos. And hence, because of that, nationalization of the narratives was limited. But once sound film arrived, things have changed. So what happened? I prepared the movies because I'm studying cinema, so I should have done that. Which kind of gives you the first movie that's showing Sultan Abdülhamid, done by a Jewish filmmaker based in Istanbul. His name is Sigmund Weinberg. I have a documentary on him, but that film, the German editor of the Kinematograph magazine called that film as, correct my pronunciation, please, Der erste rein türkische Aufnahme. The first pure Turkish film, showing Sultan Abdülhamid from 1908. So it will start from there, and it will show you a few Karagöz episodes that I'm going to touch on as I start talking about the early Republican era cinema. And then you will see some other films. I mean, like I tried to put kind of intertitles into this silent movie as much as to give you some ideas. Please, I mean, like as I read, please watch it, I would say. We are all about stories. Saadettin Kaynak, apart from doing that, in 1938, he wrote Turkish lyrics and voiced also, sang the songs of Egyptian films. For the first time in 1933, in Turkey, people were showing Egyptian films and people flocked into film theaters. They kind of broke the doors of the theaters. They jumped in. They were extremely popular. Egyptian. How come? And when you look at the newspaper accounts of that era, people are talking about, for the first time, we saw on the screen people like us. And because the films were dubbed in Turkish and also the songs were voiced in Turkish, it made a big sense for those people. And one of the sources of arabesque music is also kind of related to those Egyptian films. And those Egyptian films helped also the development of Yeşilçam cinema in the late 40s. But before that, the first public screening of movies in Turkey were done in Izmir. And 2 days after Izmir, it was done in Istanbul. And those early films were kind of mostly actuality films or shorts. Those are kind of not narrative films as we understand today. The first Turkish film you are seeing it at the moment, Sigmund Weinberg's film, but oftentimes Turkish cinema history started with a Turkish guy who made a movie of the destruction of the Russian monument in Ayastefanos or Hagia Stefanos in Yeşilköy, because the Ottomans, when they kind of took part in the First World War, one of the first things they did was dynamiting that Russian monument, because it was a reminder of the 1877-1878 Turkish-Russian War and almost big threat of the invasion of Istanbul, the capital. So oftentimes, I mean, like regular Turkish film histories list that movie as the first Turkish film, but that movie is lost. It's a very also fine story. The film is lost. The guy who claimed to shoot the movie, I mean, like you cannot trust him that much, etc. There are many details about it, which I don't want to delve into right now. But Sigmund Weinberg also started doing the first narrative films, first feature-length narrative films as we understand them today. And one of them is Leblebici Horror, written by Armenian theater actors and writers, and featuring Armenian, Greek actors and Turkish actors in the film. But the film was not completed according to the stories, but there are some records of the film being shown in some European theaters. So I think we are doing, with regard to early cinema, we are doing archaeological work. A lot of things are lost and we have to find, and we have to be able to kind of pinpoint and tell that this is that film, this is that film, those kind of things. But after those first two films, Leblebici Horror and Meta'nın İzdivacı, in around 1917 and 18, there are some Turkish film attempts handled by Sedat Simavi. These are called Pençe, Claw, Casus Spy, and Alemdar Mustafa Pasha. And then Sigmund Weinberg was also the first person to open up a regular film theater in Istanbul in 1908. Then film theaters started spreading up the city. The first proper kind of in old Istanbul film screening was done at the Fevziye Coffee House on a Karagöz screen, which shows us also a lot of metaphorical elements with the combination of Karagöz, light coming from behind, whereas in film, the projection is in front of the screen. So, I mean, like one gives life to the shadows. The other shows a record of reality. So those two screens coming together is very interesting historically. So I mean, like these are some Karagöz shots because Atatürk was also interested in Karagöz. I mean, like there are his assistant Cemal Granda has a memoir, and over that he talks about how Atatürk one day invited the Karagöz manipulator or Hayali Hazım Körmükçü and spoke with him about Karagöz performances. But Hazım Körmükçü was feeling really anxious about Karagöz because Karagöz is also a political satire. And he didn't want to kind of put on a show in front of Atatürk because it would be risky, as you know. So eventually Atatürk told him, don't be afraid, etc. And what he did was, he said, Atam, look, we give life through life in Karagöz. So I'm not giving life through light and shadows. Through Hayal is a very interesting kind of thing that you can play around in relation to how you narrate stories, how you kind of put out cinema, etc. So now from there we went on to Halide Edip Adı Var. We will see a little bit things. This is not from 1922, Izmir, when Claude Farrer also visited. They are in Izmir. Afterwards, you are going to see Halide Edip Adı Var during Sultanahmet demonstration in 1919. The interest in cinema, even though films were there, even though there were those films, etc., was very limited during Atatürk's time. And I feel like there is also kind of a reservation about it because film is tangible. Through film language, you can change everything. We have nice connections to Soviet filmmakers in that regard. Lev Kuleshov, for instance, in his workshop, he was re-editing D.W. Griffith's very nationalist Ku Klux Klan supporting films and creating socialist narratives out of them. So, I mean, that power of cinema was seen also during Atatürk's time because after he watched, for instance, in 1932, All Quiet on the Western Front, he asked the importer of the film to stop showing it at film, saying that this shows war and crime and kind of pain of the war, etc. And our nation is not yet ready for those kind of scenes. So this is 1932 after watching the film. But yet at the same time, I mean, like he was interested in filmmaking. And as I said, Muhsin Ertuğrul was around. And Muhsin, he also watched two films by Muhsin Ertuğrul. One is İstanbul'da Bir Faciaya Aşk. You will see parts from that, which was shot in 1922, and it was a silent film. And the other one is also Halide Edip Adı Var is here because Ertuğrul also made another movie called Ateşten Gömlek, A Shirt of Flame, which tells us which tells Halide Edip's story during the Independence War. But later Ertuğrul did another movie, Bir Millet Uyanıyor, A Nation is Awakening. And Atatürk also watched it and liked it. And even he himself, I mean, like, started working on a script that he has to be filmed. But this was never realized, even though like very, very similar to the theater plays you were talking about. All fine. And I mean, they very much were interested in filmmaking. You will see later on. Let me jump a little bit to be able to show those because these are, yes, shots from the streets of Istanbul, İstanbul sokaklarında. And this is İstanbul'da Bir Faciaya Aşk. And later in 1933, they invited Russian filmmakers, Sergei Yutkevich, and apart from that, Esther Shu, both of whom worked together with Lev Kuleshov and Sergei Eisenstein. and they were very, very well endowed with filmmaking. So in this movie, actually, Atatürk appears at some place, and I mean, like, there are people who are working on Atatürk on film, Atatürk in cinema. It's interesting. But this is the beginning of the other movie, Sergei Yudkevich's Ankara, the Heart of Turkey. And it starts with İsmet İnönü giving a talk, and then it starts showing old Ankara and new Ankara. It's kind of, it does a very kind of nice job of switch from traditional culture into the modern culture. That I mean, like, you have all these pastoral scenes. You can see the shepherd, the Ankara tiftik goats, etc. Those kind of things, the old Ankara, etc. And eventually, immediately after that, you switch to railways and the new Turkey. This switch is very interesting. You have the train, you have modernity, the discourse of modernity, and also its speed and pace coming into the picture. And all of a sudden it changes. But unfortunately, I mean, this is the only film from that era. There are a few other films from 1930s, documentary-like films, but they are kind of basically mashups. I mean, like, put together films from earlier actual films, etc. Those kinds of things, and they were attached a narrative. But as the last thing, before Yeşilçam, Turkification of films started with the dubbing of horror films. And it's a very interesting practice in that regard, because they were, for instance, importing a Soviet socialist realist film and switching everything into a Turkish village. And also muting all that socialist dialogue in the movie. Or, I mean, Groucho Marx movies, they were shown in Turkey, but Marx brothers, Jewish brothers, were turned into Arshak Palabıyıkyan and his brothers, so Armenians. Or like Laurel Hardy movie, Bonnie Scotland. I mean, they took that movie and Ferdi Tayfur, the dubber, not the singer, went to Robert College and listened to a few kind of Brits who are working over there, but who speak Turkish. He studied their accent and tried to adapt that accent into the movies. So they started kind of two things with voicing of the films or with dubbing of films. First, making it Turkish, rendering it Turkish, aligning with the ideology. And also, it was, after that also, Yeşilçam was the major spreading agent of the Istanbul accent all over Turkey with the radio. So that kind of also started the standardization of the accent. Okay, I think my time is up. I will stop here.